I remember the moment my family decided I no longer belonged, not because it was loud or dramatic, but because of how ordinary they made it feel. No shouting, no hesitation, just smiles. They stood together in the living room of my grandparents' house like they were posing for a photo, my parents shoulder to shoulder, my sister slightly ahead of them. She was already scanning the space, her eyes measuring walls and corners like she'd been there before in her head. "We took care of the registration," she said, tapping her phone lightly against her palm. "The house is listed under me now. You'll need to clear out by Friday." She said it the way someone mentions the weather. What they didn't ask, what never crossed their minds, was what I'd already done quietly, lawfully, and weeks earlier. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I nodded, stepped aside, and let them walk out believing they'd won. 2 days later, they came back with a moving truck. And that's when they learned the difference between a door that looks open and one that actually is. My name is Alara. Growing up, I learned early how to disappear without leaving the room. In my family, affection wasn't something you felt, it was something you earned, tallied, and redistributed. And no matter how careful I was, I always seemed to fall short. My younger sister, Naira, never had to reach. Love leaned toward her naturally. If she wanted something, it was described as necessary. If I wanted the same thing, it was called a lesson. Being independent builds character, my father used to say. Naira built expectations. I built endurance. From the outside, we looked close. Sunday dinners, group photos, polite laughter that neighbors admired. But inside our house, attention flowed in one direction, and I learned how to survive on whatever drifted back my way. The only place where that stopped was my grandparents' home. They lived near the edge of a harbor town, far enough from the docks that nights were quiet, close enough that the air always smelled faintly of salt and old wood. Their house wasn't large, but it was steady, the kind of place that didn't rush you. My grandmother listened like she wasn't waiting for her turn to speak. My grandfather trusted me with small tasks at first, errands, appointments, then bigger ones when his memory started slipping. I became the one who handled things, when later turned into forgotten. My parents and sister visited too, just not often, and usually only when something needed to be discussed. I didn't question it then. I told myself families showed love differently, that peace was worth the effort, that silence was easier than conflict. By the time I finished my degree and crossed the graduation stage, my grandparents were gone, but their house still felt like the last place where I had been fully seen. So when questions about it started surfacing, they didn't feel harmless. They felt familiar. At first, the concerns sounded reasonable. "So what are you planning to do with the property?" My mother asked one evening, stirring her drink without looking up. Managing a house alone can be overwhelming. A few days later, my father chimed in. "Insurance, upkeep, taxes, it adds up. You don't want to be stuck." Naira's approach was quieter. She began dropping by unannounced, always with an excuse. Returning something, picking up something she might have left. Each time, her eyes drifted, not at me, but at the walls, the cabinets, the desk where I kept folders. One afternoon, she smiled and asked, "You still handling all the registrations yourself? Utilities, records, that kind of thing?" Just curious. I told myself not to read into it, but my stomach didn't listen. The comments continued, wrapped in fairness and family language. It wouldn't be right for one person to keep everything. Your grandparents would have wanted it organized properly. We're just thinking long-term. I'd heard that tone before. It was the same voice my parents used years earlier when they quietly used a relative's identity to enroll Naira in a private certification program, then acted offended when questions came up later. That memory came back to me suddenly one night. I remembered how promises dissolved into avoidance, how the narrative flipped the moment someone objected, how entitlement wore concern like a costume. That's when the pattern clicked. This wasn't curiosity. It was preparation. The next morning, I took a longer lunch break than usual and walked into a small legal office tucked between a bookstore and a cafe downtown. The attorneys specialized in property registrations and identity misuse cases. I told him everything: the history, the house, the sudden interest in documents and records. When I finished, he leaned back slightly and said, "If they believe access gives them ownership, waiting will only help them." He explained my options clearly: what could be locked down, what could be exploited if left open. How often families assumed silence meant consent. I didn't hesitate. I made my choice that day. I didn't warn my parents. I didn't confront Naira. I didn't change how I acted. I let them believe I was still the same quiet person who stepped aside when things got uncomfortable. Because if they thought I wasn't moving, they'd move faster. And that mattered. The process wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No speeches. Just forms, dates, confirmations. A formal property safeguard was placed, one that required my direct authorization for any registration changes involving the house or its associated records. Once completed, it couldn't be overridden casually. That was the point. When I walked out with the finalized documents, they looked ordinary, thin, unremarkable. Power rarely looks dangerous. After that, I went back to my routine. I answered calls. I showed up to dinners. I smiled politely when Naira joked about future renovations. They mistook my calm for uncertainty. Invitations increased. Conversations softened. My parents spoke about family unity. Naira teased about how everything would work out. Behind the scenes, I documented everything: dates, messages, the assumptions hidden in their words. I didn't need to confront them. I just needed them to show their hand. And eventually they did. One afternoon, my mother called with urgency sharpened just enough to be noticeable. "We need to talk about the house," she said. "Soon." Minutes later, Naira texted, "We'll stop by this weekend. Easier to explain in person." I didn't ask what needed explaining. I already knew. They believed silence meant fear, that I would step back like always. They were wrong. The shift didn't happen all at once. It never does. It arrived in pieces, small changes in tone, confidence creeping into their voices, the way questions stopped sounding like questions at all. After my mother's call and Naira's text, I waited. I didn't chase answers. I didn't ask for clarification. I let the silence stretch, because silence makes people reveal what they assume you already know. They showed up 3 days later. Not together this time. Naira arrived first, parking too neatly, stepping out with the confidence of someone who believed the outcome had already been decided. My parents followed a few minutes later, walking up the path side by side, rehearsed and composed. I noticed details I hadn't before. The way Naira held her bag close. The way my father avoided looking directly at the door. The way my mother smiled too carefully, like she was bracing. Inside, we sat at the old dining table, my grandparents' table, the one that still had a faint scratch where my grandfather once dropped a toolbox. Naira didn't wait long. So she said lightly, crossing her legs, "We've been fixing some things that were technically unfinished." My mother nodded, just cleaning things up, making sure records match reality. I stayed quiet. Naira slid her phone across the table, not toward me, but close enough that I could see the screen. A confirmation email, a digital registration notice. My name appeared once in the body text, not as the owner, as the authorizing party. My chest tightened, not with shock, but recognition. You used my identity, I said calmly. Naira laughed once, sharp and dismissive. Used is such a strong word. My father cleared his throat. Your information was already attached to the property. It was just a matter of streamlining. Streamlining. They explained it slowly, as if I were behind. Naira had registered the house under her name using a third-party processing service, one that relied on digital verification instead of in-person authorization. She'd submitted copies of old documents, uploaded signatures pulled from archived forms, and rerouted confirmation notices. She spoke with pride, like she'd solved a puzzle. We figured it made more sense, she said. You're busy. I'm not. I can manage it better. And you didn't think to ask? I said. Naira shrugged. You never say no. That landed harder than anything else. My mother leaned forward, voice softening. Sweetheart, this isn't about taking from you. It's about balance. Balance. I stood up then, not abruptly, not angry, just finished. I need some air, I said. They let me walk away. They thought the conversation was over. After that, the pressure intensified. Calls became daily. Messages followed up on unanswered ones. My parents framed everything as concern. Naira stopped pretending altogether. You should start packing early, she texted one evening. Friday comes fast. Another message followed minutes later. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded everything. The confirmations, the messages, the timestamps. The attorney didn't sound surprised. This happens more than you think, he said. They're counting on you freezing. We moved quickly. A formal challenge was filed, not loud, not dramatic, just precise. A request for verification of identity usage. A flag placed on the property registration. Notices sent to the appropriate offices. Quiet actions. Permanent consequences. The next time they came, it wasn't to talk. It was to finalize. The morning was heavy with cloud cover, the harbor flat and gray like it was waiting. I stood on the porch when their car pulled in. Naira stepped out first again, holding a folder this time. Thick, confident. My parents followed, closer together than usual. Naira didn't greet me. We fixed the last issue, she said cheerfully. Everything's official now. She flipped it open and pointed. Her name. The property address. Stamps that looked convincing at first glance. You've got until Friday, she said. After that, we'll have to involve enforcement. My mother sighed softly. It doesn't have to be ugly. My father added, you had a chance to make this easy. I looked at the documents, then at them. Okay, I said. That word relaxed them instantly. Naira smiled, victorious. My mother exhaled. My father nodded once, satisfied. They turned to leave. We'll be back, Naira said over her shoulder. With movers. I didn't stop them. 2 days later, they returned. This time, they weren't alone. A moving truck idled behind their car, its engine loud in the quiet street. 2 movers jumped down, stretching, checking their clipboards. Naira was glowing. This won't take long, she said cheerfully. We'll have everything cleared before noon. I stepped out onto the porch. I wasn't alone. Standing beside me was a woman in a neutral jacket, hair pulled back neatly, holding a tablet instead of a folder. Calm, focused, official in a way that didn't need explanation. The movers slowed. Naira frowned. Who's that? The woman stepped forward. I'm here regarding a flagged property registration and potential misuse of personal identity. Silence fell fast. My father stiffened. There must be a mistake. There isn't, she said evenly. This property was placed under a protected registration status weeks ago. Any changes require direct biometric authorization, from the registered holder. Naira laughed nervously. "We have documents." "I've reviewed them," the woman replied. "They were submitted through an unverified service using archived identity data. That constitutes unauthorized use." My mother stepped forward. "She's family." "That doesn't change the law," the woman said. One of the movers cleared his throat. "So, should we unload?" "No," the woman said without looking away. "You should not." Naira turned to me, her face pale now. "You did this." "I stopped you," I said. Her voice rose. "After everything we've done for you." "You showed up with a truck," I replied quietly. "You didn't ask." My father opened his mouth, then closed it again. The woman tapped her tablet. "This serves as formal notice. Any further attempts will escalate." The movers didn't wait. One climbed back into the truck. The other followed. Naira stood frozen, the folder slipping in her grip. "This isn't over," she said weakly. I met her eyes. "That's up to you." They left without another word. The truck followed. The street went quiet again. The silence afterward was heavier than the confrontation itself. No shouting echoed down the street. No slammed doors. No final accusations hurled like weapons. Just the low rumble of the moving truck fading into the distance and the gravel settling back into place as if nothing had happened at all. I stayed on the porch long after they left. The harbor looked the same. Gray water. Slow waves. A gull crying somewhere overhead. The house hadn't moved. The world hadn't shifted. But something inside me had finally stopped bracing. The woman beside me closed her tablet and nodded once. "They'll receive formal notice by the end of the day," she said. "There shouldn't be any more attempts." "Thank you," I replied. She gave a small professional smile and walked back to her car. When she drove away, I was alone again. For the first time, that didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like space. The fallout didn't explode the way I'd once imagined it might. It collapsed instead. The calls stopped first. No more daily check-ins disguised as concern. No more carefully worded messages asking how I was handling things. Then came the email. Brief. Formal. Sent from an attorney I didn't recognize. It stated that all claims connected to the property were being withdrawn. That no further contact would be pursued. That any previous filings had been made in error. No apology, just retreat. I read it once and archived it. I didn't need closure dressed up as courtesy. Word spread quietly through the family after that. An aunt reached out with an awkward message about misunderstandings. A cousin asked if things were settled now. Others said nothing at all. I didn't chase explanations or defend myself. I had learned something important. People who benefit from your silence often resent you the moment you stop providing it. I let the quiet do its work. A week later, I returned to the house alone. I parked in the same place my grandparents always had cut the engine and sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the steering wheel. No rush. No knot in my stomach. No need to rehearse conversations that might never happen. I unlocked the door slowly. Inside, the air smelled the way it always had. Old wood, faint lavender, something warm and familiar that hadn't changed just because people tried to take it. Sunlight stretched across the floorboards at the same angle it had for years. Dust motes floated lazily in the quiet. I walked through each room without hurrying. The kitchen, where my grandmother used to hum while cooking. The small bedroom where my grandfather kept stacks of carefully folded papers. The desk where I once sorted bills while he watched, nodding approvingly. Nothing felt stolen anymore. Nothing felt temporary. The safeguards worked. The records were clean. The line was clear. But more than that, I finally understood what safety actually was. It wasn't the absence of conflict. It was the presence of boundaries that held even when someone pushed against them. That afternoon, I made tea and sat on the porch, wrapped in an old sweater my grandmother used to leave by the door. The tide moved in and out, steady and unbothered, just like it always had. I thought about how many years I'd spent shrinking to keep things calm. How often I'd mistaken endurance for kindness. How many times I'd been told that taking less made me mature, reasonable, strong. No one had ever told me that protecting myself could be quiet, that strength didn't have to announce itself, that choosing yourself didn't require cruelty, just clarity. I didn't rebuild bridges after that. I didn't burn them either. I simply stopped standing in the middle, trying to hold everything up with my own body. Some relationships faded. Others revealed themselves for what they'd always been. And a few, very few, found new shapes that didn't require me to disappear. On my last night there, before returning to the city, I stood on the porch again as the sky darkened. The waves rolled in steadily, unconcerned with ownership or entitlement. I thought about my grandparents, about how they never rushed me, never compared me, never asked me to justify the space I took up. They had taught me something without ever saying it out loud. That love doesn't demand access. That care doesn't override consent. That family isn't proven by what people take, but by what they respect. I hadn't defended a house. I'd honored a promise. To myself. If you've ever been made to feel guilty for protecting what's yours, your time, your work, your peace, this is your reminder. You're not wrong for locking the door. You're not cruel for saying no. And you're not selfish for choosing safety over approval. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't fighting back. It's quietly stepping into the space you were always meant to keep.